When the Galactic Council first discovered humans, they expected another harmless species on a small blue planet. They had seen hundreds of civilizations before, peaceful, predictable, and easily understood. But when they arrived at Earth and met the people who lived there, something about humanity felt different. There was a quietness in their eyes, not the kind that came from fear or confusion, but the kind that came from thinking, measuring, and judging everything around them. It was the kind of look predators had when deciding if the thing in front of them was food or threat. At first, the galaxy didn't know what to make of it. Humans smiled, shook hands, and spoke politely as if trying to show kindness. Their diplomats offered friendship. Their scientists shared knowledge, and their leaders promised peace. To most alien species, this was a familiar start to galactic membership, a process that usually ended with a young civilization slowly adapting to the greater order of the stars. But something in those human smiles unsettled the Council. It wasn't fear that hid behind them. It was confidence. A strange kind of confidence that came not from power or technology, but from experience. The experience of survival. The Council's first visit to Earth became a topic of fascination across dozens of star systems. The report spoke of a planet full of contrasts, beauty and destruction, peace and violence, kindness and cruelty all mixed together. No other world had such a history. Where other civilizations had learned unity through harmony, humanity had learned unity through conflict. Every advance in human culture came after a struggle, every moment of peace after a storm. The galaxy's historians were stunned to see that humans had fought each other for almost their entire existence, and yet they still stood, stronger than ever. Some alien scholars found this idea disturbing. Others found it inspiring. But everyone agreed on one thing: humans were survivors. They didn't just endure their environment. They conquered it. They didn't just protect their planet. They shaped it. When drought came, they built systems to carry water across continents. When cold froze their lands, they invented fire and cities to push back the ice. When predators hunted them, they learned to hunt back. Evolution didn't just give them intelligence. It gave them the will to dominate anything that stood in their way. In the early days of contact, humans were considered weak by galactic standards. Their bodies were soft, their lifespans short, and their technology, though advanced for their planet, was decades behind what the Council had seen elsewhere. The first impressions were almost dismissive. Some alien leaders even called humanity a fragile curiosity. They believed Earth would become dependent on the rest of the galaxy for protection and progress. But that belief didn't last long. The first turning point came when alien scientists studied human behavior up close. They noticed something strange during joint missions and cultural exchanges. Humans had a habit of observing everything and everyone. They would stay silent, watch how others moved, how they talked, and what they avoided. They didn't just learn facts, they studied patterns, like hunters learning how prey behaved before a chase. And when the moment came to act, they were faster, sharper, and more focused than anyone expected. One researcher from the Valari species wrote in his report, "They pretend to be calm, but their minds never stop calculating. It is unsettling to stand next to one. You feel they already know what you will do before you do it." That report spread quickly, and soon, alien diplomats began to sense the same thing. Humans didn't look dangerous at first glance, but there was something in the way they carried themselves, like a quiet readiness for conflict. The more the galaxy learned about Earth, the deeper the unease grew. History records were full of wars, revolutions, and exploration. Entire continents had been discovered by people who left home with no promise of return. Humans crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and explored space not because they had to, but because something inside them refused to stay still. It was as if their whole species was driven by an invisible instinct to go further, to conquer fear, to test their limits again and again. But among all humans, one group stood out the most to alien observers. It was the Americans. From the first days of interstellar contact, their representatives spoke with boldness, sometimes too bold for galactic diplomacy. They didn't hesitate to ask questions no one else dared to. They volunteered for dangerous missions, signed up for experiments, and pushed boundaries that other nations treated with caution. To the galaxy, it looked reckless. To the Americans, it was simply what they did, to try, to fail, and to win anyway. Alien analysts soon noticed something unique about them. While many nations on Earth valued tradition and patience, Americans seemed to thrive on challenge. Their entire culture was built around competition. Whether it was business, sports, technology, or exploration, everything was treated as a test to overcome. Losing wasn't the end. It was just another chance to learn how to win next time. This attitude confused the aliens. They couldn't understand why a people who had already achieved so much were still hungry for more. But that hunger was the key. It wasn't greed. It was instinct. The same instinct that had driven their ancestors to chase mammoths across frozen plains, now turned toward the stars. The first human expeditions beyond the solar system became famous across the galaxy. While most species waited for safe routes and steady supplies, the Americans led missions into dangerous and uncharted territories. They called it exploration, but to others it looked like hunting, searching for something unknown, testing themselves against the universe itself. They returned with stories of storms that tore ships apart, planets that tried to kill them, and yet every time, they came back alive, stronger and more determined than before. Alien media began to cover human stories with fascination. Documentaries showed how humans trained soldiers, athletes, and scientists with discipline that seemed extreme to other species. One segment featured a rescue mission where humans risked their lives for strangers on a distant world. The footage went viral across several systems, not because of the act itself, but because of what happened after. The humans didn't celebrate. They didn't see it as heroic. They saw it as normal. "We were just doing our job," one of them said. That statement sent a chill through every observer. To risk everything and call it normal, that was not the mindset of prey. That was the mindset of hunters who never stop. Even in peaceful settings, this nature showed through. During friendly cultural games held between species, humans always played to win. They studied their opponents' habits, anticipated moves, and adapted strategies in seconds. When other species asked why they took even simple contests so seriously, the human teams just laughed. "Because losing means we didn't learn enough," one of them replied. To the aliens it sounded strange, almost frightening. To the humans it was just the way they were built. As months passed, the Galactic Council began to realize that humanity didn't fit neatly into their categories. They weren't conquerors, but they weren't pacifists either. They sought peace, but only after preparing for war. They loved exploration, but never went unprepared. And above all, they adapted faster than anyone had imagined. Every weakness the galaxy pointed out, humans turned into a strength. Short lifespan? They worked harder, learned quicker, and innovated faster than long-lived species. Fragile bodies? They built machines, armor, and medicine that outperformed even advanced alien technology. Limited population? They used teamwork and creativity to multiply their reach. The galaxy had seen many species rise and fall, but never one like this. So unpredictable, so driven, and so dangerous without even trying to be. Humanity's friendliness now looked different. It was no longer just kindness. It was the same patience a predator shows before a strike, the same calmness of a hunter watching, waiting and smiling. In quiet moments, alien captains would share stories of their human crews, how they volunteered for dangerous jobs, how they joked in the face of fear, and how they refused to surrender even when logic said they should. Many found this admirable. Others found it terrifying. Because if this was humanity at the beginning of their galactic journey, what would they become after a century among the stars? The answer began forming in whispers across alien channels. Humans were not just explorers. They were not just survivors. They were something older, deeper, and more primal. A species shaped by countless hunts, fights, and struggles. And now they had found a galaxy full of new challenges. It was only a matter of time before the rest of the universe realized the truth. Humans were not prey in the stars. They were predators walking politely among those who hadn't yet seen their teeth. And among them, one nation seemed to carry that instinct more strongly than any other. The Americans didn't just adapt, they led. They tested limits and they thrived in chaos. Where others saw danger, they saw opportunity. Where others hesitated, they charged forward. To them, the galaxy wasn't a place to fear. It was a new hunting ground. As the Council's ships left Earth orbit, the alien delegates couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was watching them, not with hostility, but with interest. Like a predator studying something new, they smiled, waved, and wished the visitors safe travels. But deep down, everyone aboard those ships understood a quiet truth. The galaxy had just met a species unlike any it had. At first, the galaxy thought humans were simply curious beings who wanted to understand everything. They asked endless questions, visited new worlds, and learned faster than any species had before. But over time, that curiosity started to feel different. It wasn't just learning for the sake of knowledge. It was learning with purpose, like someone preparing for something. The aliens couldn't explain it at first, but it felt as if humans were studying them, not out of fear, but out of habit. Humans had always been like that, watchers, learners, and planners. They liked to observe before acting. On Earth, it had been a survival skill. In the galaxy, it became something far more unsettling. When alien researchers hosted humans in their laboratories or ships, they noticed how the humans' eyes never stopped moving. They would notice every sound, every motion, every small detail in the room. One alien observer once wrote that a human could walk into a room once and later describe where every object was placed, even the ones that weren't important. At first, this attention to detail impressed the scientists, but then they started to realize what it really meant. That kind of awareness didn't come from curiosity alone. It came from instinct, an instinct born from being both hunter and hunted for thousands of years. Humans had learned to notice everything because in their history, not noticing could mean death. When aliens began to study human history more deeply, they were stunned. No other species had such a violent and unpredictable story. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen on Earth through endless wars and struggles. And yet through all that destruction, humans kept growing stronger. They rebuilt, they advanced, and they improved their tools. They didn't just survive chaos, they learned from it. To the galaxy, this was hard to understand. Most intelligent species had learned peace before they reached space. They formed councils, built harmony, and expanded slowly and safely. Humanity, however, had done the opposite. They had discovered fire, then weapons. They had built cities, then destroyed them. They had created peace, then broken it, only to build it again stronger than before. Alien historians were fascinated. They couldn't decide if humans were unstable or extraordinary. What kind of species could face so much destruction and still come back? What kind of mind could find beauty in something as painful as struggle? And when they looked closer, they found an even stranger pattern. In every generation, humans celebrated people who pushed limits, explorers, inventors, fighters, thinkers, and dreamers. It didn't matter if the task was dangerous. It didn't matter if the chance of failure was high. What mattered was that they tried. And that willingness to try again and again made them different. When humans joined galactic society, they didn't bring the most powerful technology or the biggest ships. But they brought something no one else had, adaptability. They could learn any system, copy any design, and improve it in ways that surprised even its creators. A new weapon, tool, or process could be given to them, and within months they would make it faster, smaller, or smarter. Some alien engineers began joking that if you gave humans a rock, they would turn it into a spacecraft in a year. But behind that creativity was something deeper. The mind of a predator. Humans didn't just create for peace. They created for challenge. They didn't just want to match others. They wanted to test themselves against them. It wasn't pride or arrogance, it was instinct. On Earth, predators had to keep getting smarter to survive. Humans had inherited that same drive, but instead of chasing animals, they now chased knowledge, progress, and sometimes each other. And among all humans, one culture caught the galaxy's attention: the Americans. When alien observers studied human nations, they noticed that America seemed to be driven by competition more than any other. Every part of their culture reflected it. Their sports, their economy, their technology, even their entertainment, everything was about being faster, better, and stronger. Losing wasn't shameful. It was fuel. They talked about success the same way warriors spoke of victory. Alien sociologists called this the competitive spirit. But to other humans, it was simply normal life. To the Americans, competition wasn't about destruction. It was about improvement. It was how they measured growth. That mindset confused the galaxy. How could a species stay united while constantly competing with itself? Yet somehow they did. The pressure to be better didn't tear them apart. It drove them forward. When the Galactic Council hosted its first cultural exchange games, a friendly event meant to bring species together, humans participated eagerly. Most expected them to struggle. After all, the other species had advanced coordination, telepathic communication, or superior reflexes. But the humans didn't seem concerned. They trained, studied the rules, and quietly analyzed every opponent they faced. When the games began, everyone expected polite cooperation. Instead, the humans turned it into a contest. They treated every round like a battle to be understood and conquered. They didn't cheat, but they played hard, too hard for the others. And when they won, they didn't boast. They simply smiled and said, "That was fun." For the aliens, it wasn't fun. It was terrifying, because it showed them something about humanity they hadn't seen before. Humans didn't just like to win. They needed to win, not out of pride, but because victory was their way of learning. Losing wasn't failure. It was motivation. That mindset didn't belong to prey. It belonged to hunters, and the Americans stood out even more. Their representatives didn't shy away from danger. They volunteered for missions that others called impossible. They entered environments that no one had studied. They asked questions that others feared to ask. When told something couldn't be done, their response was almost always the same. "Then we'll find a way." In one exploration program, a joint team of humans and aliens was sent to study a strange and unstable planet. The terrain was unpredictable, the air toxic, and storms struck without warning. Most species withdrew after the first few days. The humans, led by a mostly American crew, stayed behind. They built shelters from wrecked parts, reprogrammed their scanners to adapt to the conditions, and mapped the entire planet before leaving. When they returned, they didn't brag about it. They just said, "It was a good challenge." That story spread quickly through the stars. It became one of the most viewed reports in the Galactic News Network. The aliens couldn't understand how humans treated near-death experiences as routine missions, but that was the secret of their strength. For humans, danger wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. Even in peaceful times, humans carried that same energy. Their soldiers trained not just to fight, but to outthink and outlast their opponents. Their scientists stayed awake for days chasing ideas. Their explorers left home for decades without expecting to return. And through all of it, they smiled, joked, and kept moving forward. It wasn't arrogance. It was the way they were wired, always pushing, always hunting for something new. The Galactic Council began to debate quietly about what humanity really was. Were they a peaceful race pretending to be strong, or a dangerous one pretending to be peaceful? The question divided worlds. Some argued that humans were the future, proof that struggle built strength. Others warned that if humanity ever turned its focus on conquest, the galaxy wouldn't survive the storm. One council member summed it up perfectly. "They wear kindness like armor. But behind that, there's something old and sharp, something we should respect." As more humans joined interstellar life, the stories multiplied. In every joint mission, in every challenge, humans adapted faster and worked harder. And no matter how difficult the situation became, they never showed panic. They always found a way, even if it meant bending the rules of physics or the limits of reason. Many aliens came to admire them. Others started to fear them. Because they realized something chilling. Humans didn't need to be the strongest or smartest to win. They only needed a reason. Once they had that, nothing could stop them. Over time, a quiet truth spread across the galaxy. If you looked closely at humans, you could see the two sides that defined them. The warmth of friends and the focus of predators. They could laugh, build, and share peace, but when pushed, that light in their eyes changed. It wasn't anger. It was focus. The same look that their ancestors once gave before the hunt began. And among all humans, the Americans seemed to carry that spark a little brighter. They didn't just explore new worlds. They challenged them. They didn't just learn from others. They competed with them. To them, the galaxy wasn't a place to settle. It was a vast field of possibilities waiting to be conquered. In every corner of the stars, whispers began to grow. The galaxy had welcomed humanity with open arms, thinking they were peaceful explorers, but now they saw the truth. They hadn't just welcomed a new species. They had invited hunters into their midst, hunters who smiled, shook hands, and learned your ways, before mastering them completely. And as the council looked again at the humans, laughing, working, exploring, and competing, a realization began to sink in. The humans were not the prey they once seemed. They were something far older, far more instinctive. They were the predators behind the smile. The first real test between humans and the galaxy began as something peaceful. It wasn't supposed to be a battle or even a serious challenge. The Galactic Council had arranged a set of friendly military exercises, simulation-based drills where different species could test their tactics and learn from each other. It was meant to build trust, not competition. No one expected anything unusual. But then the humans joined. At first, no one paid much attention. The Council believed humans were still too new to understand galactic-level strategies. Their ships were smaller, their fleets fewer, and their systems simpler. The human representatives were polite, eager to learn, and quiet during the briefings. The other commanders felt no threat from them. Some even smiled kindly as if watching a child trying to keep up in an adult game. But the humans didn't see it that way. For them, every exercise, every test was a challenge, and a challenge meant one thing: an opportunity to learn how to win. The simulation took place in a controlled area of space where no real damage could be done. Each fleet had holographic ships, sensors, and coded weapons that tracked every move and reaction. The rules were clear. This was not a war, but a demonstration of teamwork and coordination. The goal was to show unity between species. The humans listened carefully, nodding, asking a few questions, and then quietly returning to their station. Their team was mostly composed of officers from different nations, but the leading role was taken by an American strategist. The others noticed how calm he was, how his team barely spoke during preparation, just observing data and noting every detail. When the simulation began, most fleets followed the usual pattern. They spread their ships in wide formations, creating safe distances, focusing on defense. It was a style the Council had used for centuries, cautious and predictable. The humans, however, did something completely different. They didn't spread out. They didn't build walls. Instead, they disappeared. Their entire formation vanished from sensors in the first few minutes. Other commanders thought it was a mistake, a sign of inexperience. But within an hour, strange things began to happen. One fleet after another started losing communication signals. Then, one by one, ships were marked as destroyed in the system. No one could see where the attacks came from. The human fleet had turned off most of its visible transmissions, using a combination of old Earth tactics and creative code modifications. They were moving silently, hiding in debris fields, predicting the enemy's patterns and striking with precision. When the aliens finally traced their movements, they were shocked. The humans had used their supposed weakness, slower engines and simpler sensors, as bait. They had pretended to be clumsy, to make others underestimate them. Then once their opponents grew comfortable, they launched a perfectly timed trap. By the end of the exercise, every other fleet was marked as destroyed. The human team stood alone, victorious. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. The Galactic Council didn't know whether to be impressed or alarmed. The humans had turned a peaceful simulation into a perfect hunt. They had analyzed every habit, every weakness, and used it all. The observers didn't even understand how they had done it so fast. When asked to explain, the humans didn't boast or brag. They simply said, "We treated it like training." That statement echoed across the galaxy. Training. That's what it was to them. While other species treated the exercise as a game, the humans treated it as survival practice. And that difference changed everything. After that day, the Council realized something important. Humans didn't think like anyone else. They didn't separate peace from preparation. To them, learning to fight wasn't about aggression. It was about being ready. It was part of their nature. News of the simulation spread quickly. On distant planets, people whispered about the Earth Fleet incident. Some called it impressive. Others called it dangerous. Many couldn't decide whether the humans were brilliant or frightening. For the humans, though, it wasn't about showing power. It was about understanding limits, theirs and others. They believed the best way to keep peace was to know what everyone was capable of, including themselves. But to the galaxy, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a new predator testing its strength. A few weeks later, the Council invited the human leaders to discuss the results. They asked if Earth intended to build more powerful fleets. The humans smiled politely and said they only wanted to protect their people. But there was something about that answer that didn't ease anyone's mind. Because protection, when done by humans, always came with a deeper meaning. They didn't just defend, they prepared to strike back, harder and smarter. Behind the scenes, alien militaries began reviewing their tactics. They started to reanalyze human behavior, trying to predict what they would do next. But prediction proved impossible. Humans didn't follow patterns for long. Every time someone thought they had figured them out, they changed the rules. That unpredictability scared the Council more than human weapons ever could. Because technology could be copied, but mindset couldn't. In time, more simulations were held and the same pattern appeared. The humans didn't always win, but when they lost, they came back stronger. They recorded every failure, studied every move, and improved at a speed that felt unnatural. A system that took other species decades to master, they could learn in months. Every defeat was treated like data. Every success was treated like a lesson. It became clear that humans didn't view competition like others did. They didn't fear losing. They only feared standing still. That made them unstoppable. But the Council's unease grew even more when they noticed which group of humans kept leading these efforts. The Americans. In almost every exercise, it was the American teams who pushed boundaries, who broke conventional rules, who came up with strategies no one had ever imagined. They had an instinct for improvisation that left even advanced alien minds confused. They didn't follow perfect plans. They built new ones as they went. One commander once described it like this: "They move like chaos, but every move has meaning. It's like watching a storm that somehow knows where it's going." For Americans, unpredictability wasn't a problem. It was a strength. They believed flexibility was the key to survival, whether in war, business, or exploration. That idea had shaped their culture for centuries, and now it was shaping humanity's image in the galaxy. Soon, alien academies began teaching human tactics as a subject of study. Some students admired it, others feared it, because the lessons were always the same. Humans didn't wait for perfect conditions. They made do with what they had and still managed to win. This growing reputation began to worry the Council. A few leaders started to suggest keeping humans away from sensitive operations, fearing they might take control. Others wanted to build stronger alliances with them, hoping to stay on their good side. The galaxy had never agreed so quickly on one thing: humans could no longer be underestimated. The strange part was that humans never asked for power. They didn't demand anything. They just kept moving forward, eager to learn and improve. Their quiet confidence was more unnerving than any threat could be. After one particular drill, where the human fleet had again outperformed everyone, an alien admiral said quietly, "They don't fight to win. They fight to understand. And once they understand, there's no stopping them." That realization marked a shift. For the first time, the galaxy began to see humans as something beyond curious newcomers. They saw them as competitors, not just in trade or science, but in every field that mattered. And among all of humanity, the Americans became the symbol of that competitive spirit. Their mix of boldness and calculation fascinated even their allies. Over time, a new feeling spread, a mix of respect and fear. The other species started to recognize that while humans sought peace, they never let go of their fighting instincts. They didn't show aggression, but they always stayed ready. To the galaxy, that readiness was both admirable and terrifying. The story of that first simulation was retold for years. It became a quiet warning to new cadets and young officers. Don't underestimate humans. They smile while they learn how to beat you. It wasn't said with anger. It was said with awe, because even after the galaxy saw their methods, the humans never changed. They continued to cooperate, to share knowledge, to make friends. But under that friendliness was something ancient, a fire that never went out. That fire wasn't about destruction. It was about survival, progress, and the thrill of overcoming challenges. It was the same fire that had taken them from caves to cities, from oceans to stars. And now that same unstoppable drive was echoing across the galaxy, reminding everyone that humanity had arrived, not as followers, but as equals. For the Galactic Council, it was the beginning of a new age. They had invited humans to learn from the stars. Instead, they found themselves learning from humans, and deep down, every commander who had faced a human team in the simulations knew the truth that no one dared to say out loud. If this had been a real war, not a game, the galaxy might have already belonged to them. When the galaxy began to realize what humans were capable of, something changed in the air. The friendly smiles that aliens once shared when talking about Earth started to fade. The curiosity that once made them send invitations for games, tournaments, and military drills slowly turned into silence. The excitement of working with humans was replaced with an unspoken fear, a quiet understanding that humans were something different. And among them, the Americans had become the face of that growing fear. It all started with small events. An alien team refused to face humans in a strategy competition, saying it wasn't fair because humans think differently. Another time, during a space survival challenge, human crews finished the mission in half the time, and even improved the equipment they were given. At first, other species laughed it off, calling it luck or coincidence. But after dozens of such events, laughter turned to discomfort. Every time humans joined something, the outcome was the same. They won, and they learned from it. Alien scientists tried to explain it. They said it might be because of Earth's harsh environment, its mix of climates and the constant history of struggle that forced humans to evolve fast. Others said it was their psychology, a strange balance between cooperation and competitiveness. Whatever the reason, the galaxy could not deny that humans had an edge. They didn't just adapt, they thrived under pressure. And it was the Americans who seemed to push that edge further than anyone else. They were always the ones volunteering for missions that others called too risky. When the Galactic Council needed explorers for new trade routes near dangerous systems, American crews signed up first. When the Council announced research in radiation-heavy zones, they built stronger suits and said, "Let's try it." They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They made them. Many alien observers saw this as recklessness, maybe even madness. Why risk everything for uncertain rewards? But for the Americans, it wasn't madness. It was instinct. They believed that danger wasn't something to fear. It was something to challenge, to understand, and eventually to master. That attitude was what truly separated them from the rest. Some alien leaders tried to understand humans on a personal level. They visited human bases, watched how they trained, and studied their behavior. What they saw was a combination of discipline and unpredictability. Humans joked before missions, shared food with strangers, and seemed casual even when preparing for dangerous assignments. Yet when the moment of action came, everything changed. Their focus became sharp, their decisions fast, and their teamwork seamless. It was as if they had a built-in switch that turned them from friendly beings into unstoppable predators. Over time, word spread that the safest way to deal with humans was to avoid competing with them at all. Entire sporting events quietly removed Earth teams from participation, claiming balance issues. Space fleets began refusing joint training exercises because human methods didn't match. Even trade negotiations became one-sided. Humans could read situations quickly and always seemed to get the better deal. Other civilizations grew cautious, not because humans were violent, but because they were too efficient. But what truly unsettled the galaxy wasn't what humans did in public. It was what they did alone. American ships were often seen leaving Council space, venturing into uncharted territories where no one else dared to go. Sometimes they returned with detailed maps, rare materials, and knowledge of new planets. Other times they came back silent, scarred, and changed. And sometimes they didn't come back at all. Aliens couldn't understand this behavior. Exploration missions were supposed to be done in large teams, with safety protocols and constant communication. Yet the Americans seemed to prefer solitude. They didn't mind being cut off from everyone else. To them, going into the unknown wasn't punishment. It was an opportunity. They believed that if something was dangerous, it meant it was worth exploring. One famous expedition became the talk of the galaxy for decades. A small American ship called the Pioneer's Edge disappeared near the edge of the Orion Rift, a region filled with unstable energy storms. Every species considered it a death zone. No one dared to send rescue ships, but months later the same vessel returned. Its hull was scarred, the engines damaged, and the crew exhausted, but alive. They didn't just survive. They brought back data showing safe routes through the rift. The discovery opened up new trade possibilities and shortened travel times for hundreds of systems. When asked how they managed it, the American captain simply replied, "We kept going forward." To alien ears, it sounded like madness. To humans, it was perfectly natural. That single event changed the way the galaxy looked at Americans forever. They weren't just explorers anymore. They were seen as relentless hunters, chasing challenges that others would rather avoid. They didn't conquer for greed or pride. They conquered because it was in their nature to push boundaries. Even alien military strategists began studying human methods in secret. They tried to understand how such a small young species could think with such depth. What they found was disturbing. Humans didn't plan like machines or follow patterns. Their strength lay in unpredictability. They were creative, chaotic, and adaptable, a mix that no algorithm could predict. And the Americans seemed to embody that chaos better than anyone else. As a result, alien nations started setting up buffer zones around human space. It wasn't an official decision. No one declared it openly. But everyone understood. The space around Earth slowly became a quiet area. Trade routes avoided it. Patrols stopped entering it. The message was simple. Don't provoke the humans. Of course the humans noticed. But they didn't complain. They simply focused on building, exploring, and expanding quietly. While others avoided them, they grew stronger. Their technology advanced faster, their ships became more efficient, and their presence in the galaxy became impossible to ignore. There were still a few who believed the fear was exaggerated. Some younger alien species admired humans, their courage, creativity, and humor. They thought the stories of humans being galactic predators were myths. But the older civilizations knew better. They had seen enough to understand that what made humans special wasn't their strength. It was their mindset. They didn't back down. They didn't accept limits. And when faced with danger, they didn't panic. They adapted. A common saying began to spread quietly among alien travelers. You can negotiate with any species, but not with humans once they've made up their minds. It wasn't meant as an insult. It was a warning. The fear became so deep that even entertainment changed. Alien films began portraying humans as mysterious figures, silent, determined, and always watching. Alien children grew up hearing bedtime tales about human explorers who tamed worlds that others feared to touch. Some of those stories were exaggerated, but the truth behind them stayed the same. Humans were the unknown variable in a galaxy that thought it understood everything. And through it all, Americans remained the symbol of that unknown. They weren't the largest nation on Earth, nor the oldest, but their culture of daring, innovation, and persistence made them stand out. They didn't ask for permission. They just acted. They didn't follow traditions. They created new ones. When the galaxy started whispering about the human threat, it was the American ships, soldiers and explorers that everyone pictured first. In the end, it wasn't hatred that filled the galaxy. It was respect mixed with fear. Because the more the aliens tried to avoid humans, the more they realized that humanity didn't need the galaxy's approval. They were already moving forward on their own path, step by step, mission by mission. And as the stars watched silently, it became clear that no one could stop them. Because when a species learns to face fear instead of running from it, there's no limit to what it can become. The galaxy had seen civilizations rise and fall for thousands of years, but none quite like this one. Humans were different. They were unpredictable, determined, and endlessly curious. But the American, they were something even more. They weren't just survivors or dreamers. They were the kind of hunters who didn't chase prey out of hunger, but out of the pure desire to test themselves against the universe itself. And deep down, every alien civilization understood one truth they could never admit out loud. When humans entered the stars, the galaxy stopped being theirs alone. It now belonged to the hunters from Earth, and no one could ever forget that. The day the galaxy called for help was one that no one could forget. The Carnac uprising had spread faster than anyone expected. What started as a small rebellion on a distant mining world had turned into a full-scale war. Whole colonies were burning, trade routes were collapsing, and the Galactic Council couldn't hold things together anymore. The Council was desperate. They sent messages to every allied species begging for assistance. Many responded with hesitation. Others refused completely. No one wanted to face the Carnac fleets. They were powerful, unpredictable, and ruthless. But when the message reached Earth, one group answered almost instantly. It was the Americans. Their response was short and direct. They didn't ask how bad it was, how many enemies there were, or how much payment they would get. They only asked one question. When do we start? For many in the galaxy, that answer was shocking. Why would humans, especially the Americans, volunteer for something that most considered hopeless? The Council tried to warn them. They explained that dozens of fleets had already been destroyed and entire systems had fallen. But the Americans didn't back down. Their representatives simply said, "We've faced worse." To them, this wasn't just another war. It was a challenge. When their fleet finally appeared, it wasn't the largest or the most advanced. The alien observers expected something grand, massive ships, glowing weapons, a show of strength. Instead, what arrived was a relatively small task force, a few heavy cruisers, several fast attack ships, and support vessels. It didn't look impressive at all. The alien commanders whispered among themselves, wondering if Earth had misunderstood the scale of the threat, but as the days went by, they began to understand. The Americans didn't fight with size. They fought with precision. Instead of rushing into battle, they spent days observing. They gathered information, listened to intercepted messages, and studied every detail about the enemy. They watched how the Carnac fleets moved, how they communicated, and how they reacted under stress. Then they vanished from the main war front, completely disappearing from radar. Many thought they had retreated. Some alien leaders even mocked them, saying the humans had finally realized they were outmatched. But they were wrong. The Americans were not retreating. They were hunting. Weeks later, without warning, the entire left flank of the Carnac invasion disappeared. Their supply convoys were gone, their communication lines broken, and their command ships destroyed with eerie precision. No one understood how it happened. The only evidence were small flashes of light detected across deep space. Silent, sudden strikes that left no survivors. Every time the Carnacs tried to regroup, another part of their fleet vanished. When the Council finally asked what was happening, a simple transmission came through from the human flagship. "We're thinning the herd." That phrase sent chills through the galaxy. It wasn't arrogance. It was calm, matter-of-fact confidence, the tone of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Reports started flooding in from across the war zones. Small American units were appearing behind enemy lines, striking key targets, then disappearing again before anyone could react. They didn't follow standard battle formations or rely on overwhelming firepower. Instead, they used misdirection, electronic interference, and perfect timing. It was as if they had studied every move the enemy could make, and then chose the one response that would hurt them most. Alien commanders tried to imitate the strategy, but it didn't work for them. They were used to structure, rules, and patterns. The Americans had none. They operated like hunters in a wild forest, reading their opponents, predicting their next move, and striking only when it truly mattered. To the Carnacs, it was terrifying. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting predators. In one famous event, an American ship called the Resolute Dawn managed to destroy a Carnac battleship 5 times its size. It didn't do it with raw firepower, but with clever positioning. The Resolute Dawn hid in a field of magnetic debris, waiting for the right moment. When the battleship passed by, they used the debris to block the enemy's sensors and launched a series of perfectly timed shots directly at the weak points of its engines. The massive ship exploded before it could even return fire. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. That victory became a legend. Alien reporters tried to interview the American crew afterward, asking how they pulled it off. Their captain simply said, "We were patient." That one word, patient, began to define the Americans in the eyes of the galaxy. They didn't rush to glory or victory. They watched, learned, and acted only when success was guaranteed. They were proving that in war the true power didn't lie in technology or numbers, but in understanding your enemy better than they understood you. As the war dragged on, the Americans started coordinating with other human nations. Together they formed small mixed units that specialized in quick strikes. But even among them, it was the American forces who led the most dangerous missions. Their strategies became unpredictable. Sometimes they attacked head-on. Other times they staged retreats that lured enemies into traps. They could make chaos look like control. After 3 months of intense fighting, the Carnac fleets began to crumble. What was once a powerful rebellion turned into scattered survivors hiding across empty systems. When the Council called for an official meeting to celebrate the end of the war, every representative agreed that it was the Americans who had turned the tide. Without their intervention, the galaxy would have fallen into chaos. But the Americans didn't celebrate. They didn't make speeches or demand rewards. When reporters asked for a statement, the human commander said only one thing. It was a job that needed to be done. Then, they packed up their ships and quietly returned to their sector of space. For the aliens, that was even more unsettling than the victory itself. Most species would have used that moment to show power, to demand influence or territory. But the Americans didn't want any of that. They fought, they won, and then they left. just like a hunter walking away after finishing the hunt. In the weeks that followed, alien generals began studying the data from the conflict. The more they examined it, the more confused they became. Every move the Americans made seemed spontaneous yet somehow perfect. There was no single pattern, no single strategy. Each decision was unique, based on real-time observation and instinct. It was as if the Americans were not following a plan. They were reading the battle like a story unfolding before them. One alien analyst described it best. They don't fight like us. They fight like they're alive in every second of the battle. That observation spread quickly. Military academies across the galaxy started teaching human-style adaptive tactics. Even those who feared humans couldn't deny that their way of thinking was worth learning. But deep down, everyone knew that no training could truly copy the human instinct, especially the American one, that quiet confidence that made them walk straight into impossible situations and come out alive. The Carnac uprising ended with minimal human losses. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council had witnessed something they thought was impossible. A small, young species saving the entire galactic network from collapse. Humanity had proved itself not only as survivors, but as protectors when needed. Yet even as the galaxy praised them, a strange silence followed. The other species started to look at humans differently. They no longer saw them as the newcomers or the unpredictable allies. Now they saw them as something more dangerous, a force that could not be controlled, only respected. And it was the Americans who carried that reputation the strongest. From that day on, the galaxy had an unspoken rule. Never challenge a human in battle. Never underestimate their patience. Never think you've outsmarted them. Because when the humans, especially the Americans, entered a conflict, it was no longer just a fight. It was a hunt. And when hunters move, they don't stop until the job is done. After the Carnac uprising ended, the galaxy entered a strange silence. There were no cheers, no parades, no grand speeches. The stars themselves seemed to pause as if watching in quiet disbelief. The war that had nearly torn the galactic systems apart was over, and the humans, especially the Americans, had done what no one else could. The news spread across every corner of known space. Reports, recordings, and whispers filled alien networks. At first, many didn't believe it. They said it was impossible for such a small fleet, made of humans barely a century into space travel, to defeat one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. But as more evidence appeared, video logs, battle data, wreckage analysis, there was no denying it. The Americans had not just won, they had changed everything. Alien leaders held emergency meetings. The council chambers, once filled with confident voices, now echoed with quiet discussions about how to handle the humans. Some feared them. Others wanted to ally with them, but all agreed on one thing. Humans were no longer to be underestimated. They had shown patience, intelligence, and most importantly, a kind of determination that frightened even the bravest species. Soon after, the stories began to spread like wildfire. Across trade stations and border outposts, pilots and traders began sharing tales of what the Americans had done. One story spoke of an entire enemy fleet that vanished without a trace, destroyed before they could even detect their attackers. Another described a human crew that stayed hidden behind an asteroid field for a week, waiting silently for the perfect shot. Each story carried a similar theme. The Americans didn't fight wars. They hunted them. The galaxy had seen many powerful civilizations before. Species with weapons that could destroy planets, empires that lasted millennia, and races that prided themselves on logic and control. But humans were something new. They were unpredictable. They laughed in the face of danger, joked before battle, and somehow managed to win by doing what no computer or algorithm could predict. It wasn't strength that made them dangerous. It was their spirit. Many alien scholars began studying humanity in depth. They wanted to understand what made them this way. Some said it came from Earth's environment, a world full of challenges where nature forced them to adapt or die. Others pointed to their history, filled with wars, exploration, and invention. But no matter how much they studied, one truth became clear. Humans had learned to evolve not through peace, but through struggle. And among all humans, the Americans stood out most of all. Their culture was built on the idea that no challenge was too big, no failure final. They believed in trying, failing, and then trying again, harder and smarter each time. That attitude, when taken to the stars, made them unstoppable. The other civilizations started to notice patterns. Whenever there was a disaster or a crisis somewhere in the galaxy, it was often American ships that arrived first. When colonists were trapped on dying planets or when trade routes were cut off by pirates, the Americans volunteered to help. They didn't always come for profit or politics. They came because it was a challenge worth facing. But that didn't make the galaxy comfortable. If anything, it made them more uneasy. Because while humans were friendly, they also carried a quiet intensity that others couldn't understand. They smiled easily, but there was something behind those smiles. A spark that said they were always calculating, always ready. It wasn't long before alien fleets began keeping their distance from human space. Trade ships took longer routes just to avoid passing near Earth's region. Officially, it was for safety reasons, but everyone knew the real reason: fear. The humans didn't threaten anyone directly, yet their reputation was enough. The thought of angering a species that had defeated the Carnacs with such precision was enough to make entire star systems cautious. Even rumors grew strange. Some claimed that human ships could disappear into hyperspace without trace, that they had secret weapons no one had ever seen. Others said the Americans had soldiers who could fight for days without rest or machines that learned faster than alien computers. Most of these stories were exaggerated, but no one dared to prove them wrong. There was one moment that truly showed how much the galaxy had changed. During a major diplomatic meeting at the Galactic Council, a powerful alien nation made a bold statement, suggesting that humanity should be monitored more closely. The room fell silent. Every delegate turned toward the human representatives, waiting to see how they would respond. The humans didn't speak immediately. They simply looked at the speaker with calm, unreadable eyes. That silence alone was enough to make the aliens stumble over their words and quickly change the topic. From that day, the galaxy understood something without needing to say it aloud. You don't challenge humans, and yet humans themselves didn't act like conquerors. They didn't demand power or take planets by force. They didn't create empires or build massive armadas to intimidate others. They continued to explore, build, and learn, as if the war had never happened. It was that quiet confidence that frightened everyone the most, because true predators don't need to roar. They simply exist and everything around them adjusts. Alien historians began to write about this era as the shift. It was the time when the balance of galactic power changed, not because of conquest, but because of fear and respect. No one dared to attack Earth. No one dared to test American patience. The galaxy now understood that when humans said, "We'll handle it," it meant the problem was already solved. In the outer colonies, alien traders started calling Earth's people the silent apex. It became a phrase whispered with both admiration and caution. They were the top of the food chain, not because they wanted to be, but because evolution had shaped them that way. And when the Americans were mentioned, there was an even sharper tone of respect. They were known as the hunters of the stars, the ones who entered chaos and brought back order, who saw danger not as something to fear, but as something to overcome. Generations passed, and still those stories continued to spread. Children on distant worlds grew up hearing tales of human explorers who could survive anywhere, and American pilots who could fly through storms that would destroy any other ship. These stories became part of galactic folklore, but for humans it was just life. They didn't see themselves as heroes or legends. They were simply doing what they always did, pushing forward, facing the unknown, and refusing to stop. Sometimes alien observers would ask human commanders how they managed to stay calm when facing impossible odds. The answer was always simple: because fear doesn't help. Action does. That was the truth the galaxy had learned the hard way. Humans didn't just adapt to survive. They adapted to win, and once they set their minds on something, no obstacle could stand long. Over time, even the most powerful empires learned to coexist with them peacefully. Trade with Earth flourished again, but always under quiet respect. No one demanded, no one threatened. Every interaction with humans felt like dealing with a storm, calm on the surface, but with endless power underneath. And though the galaxy moved on, the memory of the Carnac uprising never faded. Every year, on the anniversary of that war's end, alien news channels replayed the same image: a fleet of small human ships returning home, battered but victorious, carrying the weight of silence behind them. It reminded everyone of what the galaxy had seen that day: a young species from a small blue planet that had stepped into the vast unknown and proven itself against the impossible. The message was clear and timeless. You can have the biggest fleets, the sharpest minds, and the most advanced technology, but none of it matters when you face a species that refuses to give up. And so the galaxy learned to live with a quiet understanding. Humans were not prey. They were predators, intelligent, patient, and endlessly adaptable. But the Americans, they were something more. They weren't just part of the hunt. They defined it. It said that somewhere out there near the edge of known space, there's a message carved into the wall of an old space station, a warning written by an unknown alien traveler. It reads, "If you ever see a ship flying the flag with the stripes and stars, don't wait to see what they want, because if they've come this far, the hunt is already over.